Olá, bem-vindas e bem-vindos.
Hello, welcome to our second debate of the cinema show exhibition of Missing Rio by Modern Art Cinemateca. This is also a parallel event to UIA 2021. It is a World Congress of Architects that is taking place in Rio. It started on July 18 and it goes through 22. This Congress aims at thinking cities and the future of cities, which is also the goal of our show. The goal of our show is to think of of extreme transformation that our city has gone through since its foundation, and especially in the last 100 years. And to debate this here, we have chosen three movies that talk about these transformations in the city. The first one, the one that we had in our show. It's important to highlight that all of the films are available at the Vimeo channel at Cinemateca. The first one is our first sovereign free translation of the title that talks about the visitation of the Belgian kings in 1920, film by the Belgian Cinematographic Service by the Army. I invite all of you to watch it and see the debate that took place yesterday with Luis Fernando Gianot and Hefner, manager of the Cinemateca, and Coelho. The second movie, the Desmonte do Monte, about the demolition of the Castelo Hill, is also available on the Vimeo channel, and it will be the object of tomorrow's debate. And the third movie, it's Crônicas da Demolição by Eduardo Ades. What is the debate today? It's important to say that the debate have simultaneous translation into English in our YouTube channel. They are available now live at the museum's YouTube channel and also the Memory YouTube channel, both in English and Portuguese. Before I invite our renowned participants, I would like to thank Fart Schwarzwald, the museum executive director who made this partnership possible, and also Hernani Hafner, manager of the MAN Cinemateca, that made all possible, has been a Rio Memórias partner to make this all come true. So I would like to first invite our guests here. I'll start to invite our movie maker and director, Eduardo Ades. Welcome, Eduardo. Eduardo has graduated in filmmaking by the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. He is the script writer and director of the movie we're going to debate today. He got 5 awards. I cannot just list everything you have in your curriculum. He has also all the Horas of the Fim with Torquato, the short movie Dama do Estácio with 20 awards. So welcome, Eduardo. Thank you for being here today. Thank you, Livia. I would like to thank the invite to be here in this debate. I would like to say thank you by the invite by the MAN Cinemateca. It's always an honor. And we are within the channels of the Cinemateca. Their team is amazing. Yes, they are sensational. I would like to invite my good friend and curator of 3 galleries in our virtual museum for Rio Memórias, Antônio Edmilson Rodrigues. He's been here with us since the very beginning of Rio Memórias. Edmilson, he's a historian. He's also a professor at PUC and the State University of Rio de Janeiro. So he's a true Rio connoisseur. He knows every corner of the city, and he's the author of several books about the Rio, its history, and its places. I would like also to thank you for taking up this invitation and participating here with us. I am here. I didn't know that Eduardo had so many awards, you know. I'm kind of concerned because it's a heavy weight that we have here in the room now. So many awards. And finally, our dear Professor Nireu Cavalcanti. It's a great honor to have you here today. Nireu is an architect and he's a doctor on social history by the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and he's a retired professor at the Federal Fluminense University, one of the most knowledgeable people on the history of Rio de Janeiro. He has over 10 books published. He is the author of classic works on Rio de Janeiro. And he's written articles and chapters and opening statements. We'll never enter the debate if we go over his curriculum. So I'd like to thank your presence here today.
Eu que agradeço.
I am the one to thank for this opportunity
Oferecendo
that you are offering and having sent this beautiful lady.
Trata-se de carioca, né?
He is a true carioca, Antônio says. So Nireu says, to be here with my good friend, Antônio Edmilson, and being here with Eduardo, who will become a dear friend too, because he's a laureated filmmaker. I think it will be a very interesting opportunity to reflect upon the issue of the destruction of the Rio heritage, having his movie as the anchor to this debate. Thank you, Nireu. Just telling a little bit of our history here. This is also Nireu's premiere with us, and it's a great honor to have him here. I will start with the main character since the main character of our live is the movie, I want to talk to Eduardo, and it's a great curiosity. Why did you choose this theme? Why do you have this interest on the destruction of the Monroe Palace, not just by the palace, but even creating this documentary? Can you tell us a little bit? Well, I think that the main motivation is unexplainable. It's an urban void. I think that many things start being assimilated by the city, by the society, and some actions you are not even aware what happened. Why? Usually you demolish something to build something in their own place, and the Monroe Palace is this atypical case that you demolish something and you do not place anything instead. I mean, there are other cases, but maybe this one is the most iconic that we have, because it was a palace that represented a series of values. It was a federal senate, it was a center of our republic. So it was also filled with historic values. When we talk about architecture, first award for the Brazilian architecture when it was in the St. Louis exhibition for the Brazilian pavilion. So there are a set of values that are associated to this building, and we will believe they would be enough to keep it standing, especially if you're not building anything instead. So this is an interest that takes us into making a movie the same way that you create a piece of news. So from time to time, we have this new article. Today, we have maybe fewer incidences because the movie also brought a lot of new information into this debate, but we always had some articles questioning the real motivation for demolishing the palace. So So this is a ghost that has been haunting us, because this is a trauma that we have not overcome. It's a puzzle we can't solve. So it kind of haunts us if we think of psychoanalysis, but it is a ghost. It is a ghost in our social existence, and it's not very well explained. And then this topic would come up back to the press from time to time. So when we had the internet bringing up those forums on preservation, the Monroe Palace is a dear topic to those forums. Now we have not just forums, we have pages on social media like Facebook or Instagram. And the Monroe Palace is always the postings that are more controversial. Some people don't know its history. But if we think, how come in the central region of the city, we had such a grand palace that was the federal Senate and it's not there anymore? So a friend of mine, he actually started like teasing me into writing this. And he was from São Paulo. He did not have this direct relation with the city, but he also, and he thought it was really promising. José Eduardo Lemonge instigated me into investigating why it was demolished. So we decided to create this documentary debating this topic. So the entire premise is think of the void. And the creation of the movie, it's also trying to understand some of the voids in the city. We have a series of voids that have become parking lots, especially in the city. I have two special experts here, and I'm not going to venture myself into talking about it because I have a lot to learn. But we started realizing that this old side of the city, there is no void when you have almost a 550-year-old occupation. So void, it's also produced. After 450 years, you're still producing void. And the Monroe Palace was kind of producing a void. And we're talking about speculation, maybe a new occupation that was in place. Some voids remained, some voids are under lawsuits, or they were place of a fire, then they began a parking lot. But we know when we look at a void in our central area of Rio, you know there was something there because it was never demarcated to be a parking lot. Something had been built there. And the palace was deconstructed and it became a void. So we must think the city as a stage of transformation. What are the factors that lead a city to transform itself? What is the economic and political game that is transforming the city? I think it's quite interesting, and I think the film depicts it very well. You show how demolition was instigated shortly after the building of the palace in 1906. We start having the debate on the demolition until you get to 1976 when it is in fact destroyed. And throughout the documentary, we see that. And I want to pose you another question right now. You managed to get a group of not just architects and urbanists that are very relevant, but also of people that are related to the Monroe Palace destruction. You had the subway, you had the president, Geisel. How did you manage to gather so many interesting people together? Well, this starts from a certain fear, because when we get the first call for tenders by the Secretary of Culture of Rio de Janeiro, and I'm thankful for this call for tenders, it's important. We need to develop, we needed to research. And then we faced this challenge, and the fear came. We're gonna have to do the most boring thing, that is talking about a building. So, and question why it was destroyed. So how can we turn this movie into something interesting? And then we decided we didn't want it to be an expert movie. It needed to be a character. People had to get a certain relation with that building. It's not a real character, but we needed to establish a relationship. So we must create a direct relationship. And we ended up trying to create this direct relationship, this structure. Sometimes we can't achieve it because it's the beginning of the century. We do not have the witnesses to the event, but some experts will take the place to create this story. So we started like chasing or seeking the key witnesses of those processes, especially of the demolition process, because it's most recent. It's about 40 to 50 years old. And we have these people who was like buying pieces from the demolition, who decided upon the demolition. So we had Geisel, we had his representative, we had Mario Carlos, who was the subway director, and yes, he was aware of the trajectory of the subway. We have Maria Elisa Carrazona, that brings a very important testimonial of what happened in that meeting at the Heritage Commission that deciding on the demolition. We also had Jonas Sliaticas, who was also one person involved in the process. And we also organize these people in a structure. And this structure is a filmmaking decisions, and we have less experts and more characters. And we organized these characters into an action movie, so that we could have a better rhythm, something more interesting to the audience. We understand that it was like a crime, because it was a crime against heritage. So we create a true crime action movie. So you have the usual suspects, and then we start with one suspect. The person who purchased, was it a robbery with murder, with homicide? The person benefited from purchasing the lions from the demolition. You know, we have the representatives. We have Antônio Souza Guiar, who is the grandson of Francisco Marcelino, who is also one of the victims. So we have some inspiration. We have a lot of night scenes to create this atmosphere. Usually you don't see night scenes on architectural movies, and in our movie we use plenty of scenes. I think it gives us an interesting rhythm and lighting to the movie. Because we wanted to get more interest from the people, and then our narrative can be interesting. We go back, we come forward, and it becomes very interesting. Wow. Yes, it's the murderer of Monroe Palace, actually. Eduardo, I wanted to ask a question to Nireu, that he could tell us a little bit something, the role of the modernists, the modernist architectures, especially Lucio Costa. I would like you to talk a little bit how the role of those architects, how they started this movement of building and destroying buildings in the city, especially when we talk about the Monroe Palace.
Yes.
If you allow me, this insertion of a certain group that had social economical interests, it comes from a dualist vision, me and the other. I am good and the other one isn't. This is not the history of Rio de Janeiro.
com oportunidade.
There is always someone with the opportunity of making their intentions come true. This person thinks they are wonderful. They think they are the best. The rest must be destroyed.
Mas eu queria colocar
But what I wanted to say was I wanted to bring a striking element in the history of the city to explain that the destruction or demolition of Monroe and other public properties, it's because this city was born for real estate speculation.
quando vocês criavam uma
As a colony, at the Portuguese occupation, you needed to create a village or a place, and you needed to set the properties of those lands. And those lands, they were managed by the deputies that should
ofertar
offer
de terreno
to the people who needed land by paying a small amount.
valor, a Câmara
With this amount, the chamber would have resources to manage the city. So any free person, because slaves had no rights whatsoever, any free person could send a request to the Chamber of Deputies
fazer a sua loja
to establish their business or get their home. But what happens is that those public lands,
elas foram saqueadas.
they were stolen by the Jesuits and by the deputies and by the great fortunes of the city of Rio de Janeiro, with using fake documents, and public officials were as accessories to these actions. And this public land was out of the old, alleging that this land was located outside of the old town, and having this line established from the Conceição Hill to the Castelo Hill, you set this line, it was set with a wall from the French invasion. Everything that is beyond this line into the sea, it belonged to private entities. So the city was stolen. The land was stolen from the city. They created their own version and created this story of vandalism by the public administration. From then on, everything is possible in Rio. On the other hand, we have a history of a lack of continuity by public administration. So we have one mayor, abandons all the previous projects, starts everything from scratch, throws away public resources and money that had already been invested in the previous project. This is another characteristic that explains this vandalization of our city. After that, we have never created a technical board with some stability. This board is developing a certain approved project, and it will remain there regardless of any results. We have never had that in the public administration of Rio de Janeiro. After that, our public administration has never carried out any of the presented projects. Since the project by Peruan in 1846, a grand project for the city, and after we have Pereira Passos' project in 1874. Nothing was done. And after that, we had a gas ship. That the only thing that was done was the Castelo Esplanade within the rules they had established, and creating those passageways and those terraces, verandas on Avenida Presidente Vargas. This project suggested 80 kilometers of subway in 1926, and nothing was done. After that, Lacerda's project proposes 90 kilometers of subway. So what did the public authorities do? They created the large highways for cars. So this is another great problem that we have. And then we have a set of professionals that are anxious to create their own projects, and they are not, and they shamelessly demolished Prado. There was a project where we had Avenida Passos today, and it became a parking lot, and behind it we had the building of the very first natural history museum in Brazil, which was built and began by our viceroy, Luiz de Vasconcelos. The bird's house. Yes, exactly. So the Minister of Finance and Economics, he decided to run his ministry, build his own ministry. He demolished the building, and all those modernist architects were there. They were bidding for setting their own project. And they were not ashamed to say, no, we are not going to demolish this building. Choose another piece of land. No. No, you don't need to care for heritage. So today, we have a parking lot. And small samples at the Botanical Gardens. We have the portal there. So we have this vision of the city like this giving mother, loving mother that raised their child, and the child is lost in the world. And she says she loves them because she still carries a lock of hair. And everything represents everything. That lock of hair represents the son or the daughter, and their child is lost in the world. We are keeping locks of hairs, and we are saying that we are preserving things. So we have this elite, this building elite that is of the worst quality. They are destroyers. So this destroying elite is the elite that wanted land and said, let's demolish the origin core of the original core of the city, Mayor Carlos Sampaio. And who opposed to that idea? So far, from what I have heard, our great Lima Barreto and the author Monteiro Lobato. Only the two of them opposed. Noronha Santos proposed that they should build a city museum at the Castelo Hill, Morro do Castelo. The city museum was built years later at a different neighborhood. So this is what happens. You destroy the early beginnings of the city shamelessly, everybody paying compliments, everybody celebrating, the press, everybody celebrating. Only those passionate men, retrogrades, old-fashioned, that opposed to it. And we had had a great experience from the exhibition 1908. We chose a piece of land at UERJ. The city, the neighborhood became a new neighborhood. It grew. And then we had a few engineers and architects that proposed that we should bring it to the São Cristóvão region. There was enough land for that, and they would not demolish anything. No, let's demolished because we like this place. So public officials, the city hall, the professionals involved, because they would be hired, they would get new work, and the real estate speculation. Let me just seize your talk, but I want to go into a question to Antônio Edmilson, because I think it's important. I think it's so important that you emphasize this speculation and the voids. Instead of talking about, I'm mentioning the name of the next movie we're going to debate, but I think Antônio Edmilson can bring us a fresh look, a new look of how the organism of the city was and how the Monroe Palace was important to that area of the city and what it meant as a city to destroy it. The importance of the people that walked about, politicians and all, in that area. So what did the demolition of the city meant to an organic city? I think Edmilson wants to speak, Nireu. Can we give him the floor? Okay. No, he can join in afterwards, no problem whatsoever. I believe that since we are debating the movie by Eduardo, I think that the film, at least to me, brings a great impact because it felt like making a new film. A second film with what was lost from the inside. Because your film is very interesting because it shows the stone being destroyed and demolished. And in a very funny situations, because Souza Aguiar just went there and said, please just remove this here because it has an expiry date. So they shipped everything here back from St. Louis because it was all disassembled in St. Louis. They brought it here, they built it here, and they could not disassemble it back again and transport it to another location here in Rio. But they managed to do it in 1906. And I'm mentioning this because in the movie, in your film, this other side is there. So what was inside it? I remember that inside it, there were amazing things. When we talk about gastronomy, because Osvaldo Aranha even had a dish named after him because he was there near the Monroe Palace by the restaurant Lamas, and he was also surrounded by other restaurants. So there is this dispute over the memory of the dish named after Osvaldo Aranha. So all the material that was inside the Monroe Palace, everything that was as an inner memoir in its heart, it was just like a stone, a rock. It disappeared. And I think you were right when you talk about the voids, Nireu, because we're questioning this movement, but for Nireu, it started a long time ago. And we have this movement, especially on the 1930s, when we have this idea of advances and progress that feed a city, and that according to some people that you interviewed, that when we talk about transportation and buildings, constructions, the two large destroying elements of the city and of the heritage are transportation and construction. And I think that if you remeasure the location where the Monroe stood, and Italo also says that by removing the Monroe Palace, you destroy the palace as well, because you had this communication with the municipal theater and the Monroe Palace. And Margaret, at your film, mentions it the social, the political frisson of people talking, people walking around, all was lost. Because there was this blend of social, leisure, and politics, because everything was mounted on those aspects that created the heart of the city. And I saw it, and Nireu also saw it. The book fairs that would take place on the Cinelândia Square. And it concentrated everything there. And this is a conversation that reproduced the Republican dimension of the city, because the most relevant buildings, like the Monroe Palace, they are a part of the Republican share of the city that is lost forever. The other day, I was surprised when someone said, let's destroy the Monroe water fountain. And I said, what Monroe water fountain? I mean, it became a ghost because it was never a water fountain at the Monroe Palace. Just like the Castelo Hill, you have the little church, Santa Rita church, that is even a little crooked. When you're coming down to Praça 15, you take that São José Street and you go down the steps to get to São José Street. And when you get to Nila Peçanha and Rio Branco Avenue. So it's just like the Monroe. It's still present. It's still there somewhere. It has become a ghost. It's present in the city all the time. And this caught my eye because the concern with the material memory, when we talk about immaterial heritage, is very strong. But no one is talking about what was inside the Monroe Palace. They were central elements to Brazilian politics. In your video, in your film, we saw the microphones, the chairs. So this interior was very important to design this loss. And I think this is the important element. But I also think that Nireu can give us an idea of the arguments that were used, because there is a very interesting passage in the film when Ítalo talks. Ítalo said, I didn't like the Monroe Palace, but I didn't want to destroy it. It was my personal taste. It had a memory to the city. So the idea of this memory of is what Nireu was saying, that the modernist architects, when we're talking about the 1930s, 1940s, they have no idea what the city is. They have an idea what the constructions in the city are, but they are not creating city. The dimension of the urbanist only matured much later, so that you can learn, and we see it up to today, that there are works by engineers and architects that are not conversing with the surroundings. They're only unique on their own. And I think that your film reveals it. And I kept thinking today about the interior of the palace. We should have a film on the things that were inside the palace. I think I told you a story of a friend of mine who got the reception balconies, the reception counters of the palace, and he actually created a bar using those counters. And some things that traveled to many other places from inside the palace. And this is what is interesting about a city. It's dynamic. You have movement, and it makes us pay attention to. Alfredo Brito also called the attention to the possibility of a dialogue. If you had the Central Avenue today, as the original, you would have this wonderful, glorious avenue. Also, when you talk about the Buenos Aires street, that Prainha Square, the Conceição Hill, if you in Bahia, you have Pelourinho, here we have valuable spaces And I think I've told Livia that already. At the celebration of the Olympics was to call that boulevard called the Olympic Boulevard. It should have been known as the Atlantic Boulevard because Atlantic Ocean is the one that bathes our shore. And Nireu knows very well that the Atlantic goes into South America, Africa, and the sensitivity of the people in the city, it walks hand in hand with these effects of destruction that you show in your film. How can you say that a station that is a bus station that is in front of a palace is called the Shippers Station? And why does a tram station is not called the Mauá Square stop? Why is it called the museum stop if the museums are new? We don't, and then they even call one of the tram stations as a Formosa Beach, and the Formosa Beach isn't even there anymore. We are not even going to talk about the BRT system. I only like the Mato Alto station's name. There are some of the stations at the West Zone, but the rest, my friends, it's a lack of connection to what the Rio de Janeiro traditions are. And I think this is very important. We are not going to debate this here now. Livia is going to set up another live meeting for constructive dimension debate. And she's going to invite a lot of dear friends so we can discuss what happened to our city. I remember, I think Eduardo maybe remember that too, when we had car races in Copacabana Beach. Tennis tournament, not beach tennis tournament, but tennis tournaments on Copacabana Beach. So there are a whole set of things that were created here in the city. I think Nireu wants to talk. But what impressed me the most when we had the Olympics here was going to Copacabana, crossing the tunnel at the Princesa Isabel Avenue and see that volleyball arena that would take up all the space, and I couldn't see a drop of the sea. This is huge destruction. Yes, and it was very tall. You couldn't see anything, so it was crazy. And this way of thinking of Rio de Janeiro, this lack of sensitivity, why did we sing it, Rio de Janeiro so much in beautiful songs, and everybody, Graciliano Ramos, Marcos Rebelo, Ribeiro Couto, everybody. Marcos Rebelo has a book that I recommend that is a anti-touristic script of Rio de Janeiro, a free translation of the book title by Marcos Rebelo, that fights, that questions what we are talking here today. But Nireu has a lot to say. Let's go. Come on, Nireu, the floor is yours.
Com essa introdução que eu fiz, é para dizer o seguinte.
With this I did my introduction to say that a city that destroys its origin and nothing happens, so everything is possible. So the destruction of the grand Monroe Palace was more than expected, because when we open up the Central Avenue, it was lacking an end. They said this obelisk, it starts at the Mauá Square and it comes to the Beira-Mar Avenue, the By the Sea Avenue. So the project of this avenue has nothing to do with Pereira Passo. It's a project by another architect, people who need to understand. We are not complementing Pereira Passos. We are only registering a concrete object. He would never object that. He thought of a different model of organization of the city.
Havia uma praça em frente.
There was a square opposite to the Ajuda convent. Paulo de Fronten, he wrote that with great pride that he'd never destroyed a church or any important building in the region. So he preserved. So the avenue that he preserved was missing characteristics, missing an end, because it would stop at the municipal theater. So the Monroe Palace, a beautiful project, a beautiful technological sample. Souza Aguiar, the most competent architect and engineer, he projected for the first time, maybe at least within Brazilian projects, he was the first one to think of not throwing public money away. They finished the exhibition in St. Louis. He developed something that should be disassembled because he started developing a lot of steel technology. The great example is the fire brigade building, which is a beautiful structure. So he mastered that knowledge. He disassembled the palace and reassembled it there, which was the fundamental element to create the avenue itself, to give an end to the avenue, a final to the end, this urban construction, to begin and to end Central Avenue. This is the first importance. It could not have been unknown by anyone. How can you destroy something that is an urban architectural mark, an importance, a stone here? The second thing, it's a great example of architecture, of the eclectic architecture. So this vision that those groups have, and I own the truth. So the modernist and the historical heritage institution considered everything that was colonial and some things from the 19th century. They chose selectively what was worth it, because everything that was worth now was the modernist construction. So they wanted the colonial constructions. They thought it was beautiful with the churches and everything. Starting from the Capanema Palace, that they included among the historical heritage. And this vision was well accepted and used by the real estate speculation. So when we have the proposition for demolishing the Monroe Palace, it was not the end of the process. Alfredo Brito showed the contest that there had been to implement the building he called the Popsicle with Sérgio Bernardes' project. And all the great architects joined in, and they all joined in into this call for tenders. Nobody questioned the building shaped like a popsicle by the great urbanist and architect Sérgio Bernardes. If they had built that building, we would probably have this great entrepreneur that would develop a cable cart between the popsicle and another tall building. So the city of Rio de Janeiro would have a cable cart hanging in the middle of the central city. So this destroying vision that is serving the real estate speculation. So why did they destroy the Monroe Palace? It was a personal issue by a dictator, Geisel. It was a personal issue by Geisel. And it was a personal view and issue by Lúcio Costa, a wonderful professor and architect who wrote some books. His name is Paulo Santos, as well as a group of architects proposed conserving the Rio Branco Avenue. And the Historical Heritage Institution denied it. And one of their leaders was Lúcio Costa, because he said it was a series of eyesores. And our Monroe was there. So they always have some excuse, some cheap excuse to justify absurd propositions. So we have had several modifications. There is no problem with that. We see Martha Rocha, beautiful, and she has aged, and she's not beautiful anymore because she has aged. Do we have to preserve a young Martha Rocha, who used to be Brazil's Miss for international contests? So these modernists defended the architectural eugenics. It had to be pure. So Monroe, this is always their excuse. And then they use the same excuse to destroy the army building. And they consulted with the IAB and with the Historical Heritage Building. Oh, there is no value to this construction. So these are hygienists. And I like, so who's the one who saved few examples of eclecticism and neo-colonial? It was the Lacerda administration when they created the heritage and developed and delivered to Marcelo Capanema. This new group is that the one that started conserving and preserving the heritage of Rio de Janeiro and started qualifying them as heritage, because our heritage institution, historical institution, defended the eugenics or the euthanasia of styles. But it was Carlos Lacerda who created this heritage institution that defended, that listed those buildings. So it's a crime. So the destruction of the Monroe Palace is a crime. It's a crime to history. It's a crime against the Avenida Rio Branco Avenue. They destroyed, nobody builds the possible, and they put the water fountain. Later in the Brizola administration, they did a call for tenders to create this huge monument to industrialization to the dictator called Getúlio Vargas. It was built and they removed the Mahatma Gandhi statue so that they could create this great monument to Getúlio Vargas, a dictator. All grand architects entered this call for tenders. I don't remember the name of the winner, whose project was later on transferred to Russell Square. That monstrosity that lays there is the monstrosity that was going to be placed on the void of Monroe Palace. So this is the city. This is this accessoring crime between public administration and certain groups at certain point. The Catholic Church was responsible for that. Now we have the real estate market taking place. And we had the transportation owners negotiating too, and illegal games too. Now we have the militia, we have drug dealers, and we have still a few illegal gamblers, all united against the city. So let's create the tram and not create the subway. You use an expression when we were talking before we started this debate here. You had this historian that would tell the history of Rio. He was a writer of obituaries. That's what we became. We became obituary writers. So I'd like to congratulate Eduardo on his film. It's beautiful. It's a great contribution. Livia, what I think it's interesting is that we are involving our activity in the Architectural Congress. And the debate that Nireu is posing here, it is extremely interesting for us to maybe open a possibility with Rio Memórias to start a work comparing this modernist dimension of the city, thinking of a modernist Rio, a specific Rio modernistic gallery, and showing the other side of things, because not all modernists supported these movements. We had several trends, and that's why we always say it in the plural, modernists and not modernism. We say modernists because an interesting reference and which will lead into an interesting discussion for this show, why the city has become so Art Deco. We have beautiful modernist examples as the housing units in Gávea that are very interesting pieces. When you have this idea of having a city within the city, there are several interesting aspects. Not everything was carried away to the end, but since we are in a Congress of architects, maybe we should open the debate for the architects that are listening to us so that they can express themselves in the sense of the criticism they can create. I think modernists did very many good things too, so we must counterbalance that. But Nireu is going deeper into an aspect when we are talking about the genealogy of the city. He's talking about some trends that we are studying right now when we talk about the merchant city, the marketing city. Is the city selling itself? Carlos has an interesting sentence. He says, "Steady as a merchandise. It's something unexpected and surprising. They have never had such a cool merchandise as a city." This is a deluxe merchandise, and it's quite interesting. So this is a debate that we can put on paper and develop and talk about this set of questions and issues. And Nireu has inspired me. Just that this destruction is so large that not even the first modernist house built in Copacabana resisted. Today it's a building, not even that. So it is a monster that is eating the city. we are almost getting to the end of our time. If anyone in the audience would like to pose a question, please type in the YouTube chat box. But I'm going to enjoy the opportunity here, seize this opportunity and ask Eduardo that Nireu mentioned the personal issue by Geisel, and I remember that we talked a little bit about it. You don't need to be specifics. What have you chosen to leave out of the movie? We talked about the interior of the palace. What did you choose or preferred for whatever reasons, maybe inaccuracy? What did you choose to leave out? Well, a lot. Most isn't in the film. This hypothesis of this private bakery between Souza Guiar and Geisel is something we investigated deeply. Within the Souza Guiar family, people who defend this hypothesis and some people that do not believe in it. So we went to the Army Historical Archives because according to this hypothesis, there was some bakery between President Geisel and Rafael Souza Aguiar, who in that case was the son of Francisco Marcelino. So Geisel had missed out on some opportunities in the army in detriment for Francisco Marcelino. So we are talking about two brilliant military that have identical promotions in the same classes all the time, and they followed totally different careers. But maybe one of them was more connected to troops, the other one with logistics, but there are several complementary notes. At the end, there is a difference between months. Another is going to turn into infantry general, the other one into brigade general. I'm not very sure. It's something small. I believe that this hypothesis is not true. It's not there. Antônio Souza Aguiar. This is Antônio Souza Aguiar mentioned recently that his son or his uncle, Luis Souza Aguiar, I don't quite remember, was the one that fought the hardest against demolishing the Monroe Palace. He was hurtful of Geisel because Geisel never heard his arguments. So Francisco, Marcelino, and Geisel, they're not so different. And then Geisel will be concerned about some person. You know, Geisel was the president of Petrobras, and then he was the president of the Republic. He commanded a country. So to being hurtful of a bakery back from army school. So it kind of releases what Geisel felt. He's not hurtful, it's speculation. It's not money from himself. He wasn't necessarily going to get any money out of this real estate speculation, but he was envisioning business expansion and some strong sectors in the economy and the real estate market. This was a direct influence. We have that example of that giant lot between the Quitanda street. We even show them on the movie. It's also become a parking lot. They were favoring that business would become some building. So the government was interested in how many people the civil construction employs. So there is an entire project for a country involved. Use the land of the city as a business opportunity for an economic plan. And then we realized that try to counterpart the hypothesis was hard. Something we also left out was a debate about the payment of the capitality of Rio de Janeiro. We believed it was more of a historical interpretation than a motivation, a conscious motivation. For certain, what Geisel was debating about Rio de Janeiro back then was the incorporation of the Guanabara state to the city of Rio de Janeiro and the demolition of the Monroe Palace. This is on Geisel's agenda every day, constantly. The incorporation of the Guanabara state to the city of Rio de Janeiro is much larger than the demolition of the Monroe Palace. But the decision to demolish the palace had already been taken much earlier, some 2, 4, 5 years earlier. So he starts a campaign on information organs, which were the media, the newspapers, to convince the population that it was going to take place. It had been decided. So we started talking to 2 historians. We had great testimonials about what happens, what you want to do when you incorporate the Guanabara state to Rio de Janeiro. Geisel had the interest of centralizing power in Brasilia. So I don't want to have my chamber, my Senate distributed all over. I want to centralize everything. Let's end that Monroe Palace and let's destroy this symbol. I want to centralize everything. I don't want to think of all my power distributed in many other locations. So this has an important role. So we also leave this out. And there's also the monument on Getúlio Vargas. We filmed it all. But we realized that when our main character, the palace, dies, we are debating Monroe more than the square. So what happens after the square? We ended up just leaving the water fountain there, you know, just like the Monroe, that is a walking palace. That water fountain that is there is also a traveling water fountain. It was bought in Austria, then it goes to Praça 15, then it goes to the Bandeira Square, and then it's a traveling water fountain. So this is something else that we decided to leave out, as well as the Getúlio Vargas monument. This is indeed interesting, Eduardo. We have a few questions here by our audience, and we have to end soon. I have a suggestion for you, Eduardo. A film on the many substitutions of buildings on Rio Branco Avenida Rio Branco itself and the voids on Presidente Vargas Avenue. Eduardo says, this is amazing, because if you think there are no lots on Presidente Vargas Avenue, you are demolishing things and there are empty lots. So this is what Alex Nikolaev talks about in the film, and Margaret da Silva Pereira also mentions it. Pereira Passos' work had already been destroyed 4 years after his administration ended, because the elevators were invented and you started like building tall buildings.
Agora não lembro qual foi a troca, né? O clube de engenharia se engajou.
I don't remember, because the engineering club was very involved in favor of preserving the Monroe Palace. We had Durval, who signed many documents.
E tem documento que eles mandam pro
And we had this document that they sent to the Heritage Foundation Institute, and Lúcio Costa answers himself with a large text. Didn't you destroy your own headquarters?
isso.
So this is it, because there is an issue with legislation as well, because if you have this 4-story building and you say this 4-story building is taking place of a 40-story building, you are throwing away 36 stories. When we talk about the Jornal do Brasil building, we talk about many buildings. The buildings that remain, they're basic public buildings. Let's just remind you that the master plan of the city is being debated right now. I just wanted to tell Eduardo that the building from the engineering club, it fell down. It fell down. We are not talking about the one that was destroyed. We are talking about the one that collapsed, the first engineering club building. It was me. I built it and it collapsed. And then they built another one by engineer Edson Passos. You had that marquee that you would burn under the sun. You will get wet by the rain if you just stood under that marquee. So I have a question that can be for either Nireu or Antônio Edmilson. Nireu answers. Marcos Oliveira, how can we know that Pereira Passos renovations were the result of an cultural organicist decision, since many people define him as a municipal dictator back at that time, and not necessarily a demolisher? We are not saying that he was not a dictator. I'm not going to say that he was not the demolisher. We're just saying that the avenue was not his work. It is by Lauro Miller's group, by Francisco Bicalho, Paulo de Fronten, is by the engineering group, is not by the Pereira Passos group, even though he helped them out when he created the engineering club after his experience in the Improvement Commission. And he had a great project that is reproduced on the side of Pereira Passos on the renovation of 1903. That's why Margaret says that when the renovation started taking place, it became almost immediately old, because it was still a 19th century renovation and not a 20th century renovation. We had Art Deco entering, it took over, and eclecticism started missing space. And then we have two different moments in this renovation. But Nireu is the one to answer this question. I want to remind you that the Improvement Commission project from 1874 that Pereira Passos took part of comments that they should destroy the Castelo Hill and the Senate Hill. Since it can't be done, we're going to do improvements. And they proposed a new city at the Tijuca, Vila Isabel, and Andaraí region. The new city would be built there. And Pereira Passos created this beautiful project of the university there. So when he comes back, he is invited to be the mayor of the city. The mayor was designated by the President of the Republic, and the President undid the chamber so that he could run all the projects and also use Lauro Miller's project. So he accepted this role of running without the council. he invited an engineer of the commission, and they implemented what was possible from his project dated 1874, which was the widening of Uruguaiana Avenue, because they thought that the port would be connected to the south zone by Uruguaiana Street and connected to the north zone by the widening of the São Joaquim Street, which created what we call today the Floriano Peixoto Avenue. So he was accused of destroying the São Joaquim Church. One interesting thing, he had created this idea of an university that was UERJ, the State University of Rio de Janeiro. And then at the end, his project of 1874, much later on, became a university itself, as Pedro Passos had planned. What we cannot forget is all those grand works were had in mind building houses for the displaced populations. This is the main characteristic. All constructions and renovations from 1874, you would displace the population and you would not create housing alternatives. So these people moved and created the favelas. Quinta da Boa Vista is an example. It's a great example. They finished the project by Glaziu. They had this community living with permission by Dom Pedro II and the army. They destroyed those houses, over 140 houses, and there was not one occupation project to give housing to this displaced population. 16 families invaded the Telegraph Hill, and there we had the Mangueira favela. It was reported. The engineer went there, did all the measurements, and said, oh, let's build some 16 houses next to here. Did the mayor build anything? Nothing. So this is the characteristic. For the poor, it is go live on the streets. This is typical of Rio. And the people is not guilty, and now the people are finding their space. When the city, that's what happens here. The city reaches where the poor is living, and they displace the poor again without any housing solutions. When we talk about gentrification, or today we talk about the port zone today, it's something that we need to take into consideration. There is so much to say, and what I loved about Eduardo today, I don't know if he has seen the gallery that we put together, but one of the hypotheses that we have developed in this new gallery is that the Rio remains capital of Brazil from 1964 to 1974. Centrality was still in Rio de Janeiro, and we wrap up with this conclusion, with this consideration by Maria Elisa and Margaret, because here we had manifestations, and this gives us the opportunity in our gallery. When we talk about urban moralism, you end up ending with a circo voador, and you transfer circo voador from Lapa to Ipanema, and then you would open up and see those great buildings of Petrobras, the old Housing National Bank, And then you open Chile Avenue, everything for an exhibition in Portugal. I don't know if Nireu remembers that even the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro had that language graduation there where we are talking about on Chile Avenue. And the city is so interesting that sometimes people ask me, wow, did you have some favelas on Tiradentes Square? Because there are pictures that you see that the background of the Tiradentes favela, Tiradentes Square, that you see the Santo Antônio Hill, and there is a favela. So there are current interesting ghosts in the city. This is very interesting about Rio de Janeiro. My friends, we must conclude. But I believe that Nireu and Antônio Edmilson raised this issue. And I think it was very, very important that we should end with a social issue. I think we were missing out on talking about the social issue of the city. Actually, the great character of the city, it's residents. And this is what gives lives to the city.
Quem discute, quem participa.
Who debates, whose part, who is most affected is never involved in the debate. So I believe it keeps repeating, it's still here. So this debate, I think it will leave insights to this fundamental talk and debates that we have here when we reflect upon the master plan by the city, the revival plan for the city downtown, the architectural congress, and that we should insert in the center of this debate the people that live in the city, and they are so important, and they are always being displaced. Yes, now it's an invisible nation before. So I would like to thank Nireu, Edmilson, and Eduardo. It was wonderful. I could be here up until midnight, but unfortunately, we have to go. And tomorrow we have yet another debate about the destruction of the hill. Yes, because we have two interesting architects. Evelyn wrote a book on the Presidente Vargas Avenue. She has a book that is available on the internet. And Cessa has several interesting and important ideas in relation to Rio de Janeiro. Both are my good friends. And Livia says, I must thank you, Edmilson, for referring their names for guests. So please watch all the movies. And check out the galleries of the Rio Memórias at riomemorias.com.br. Watch the movie for tomorrow, and tomorrow we have another debate. So thank you all.